Hey everyone, welcome. So think back for a second. Have you ever had a moment where you acted just completely out of character? Like maybe you snapped at a friend over literally nothing, or you totally sabotaged an opportunity you've been working on for months, and afterwards you're just sitting there thinking, who on earth was that? Why did I just do that? If you've been there, you are in the exact right place today. Okay, let's dive into this explainer because we are going to unpack what is honestly one of the most fascinating paradoxes of being human, the absolute mystery of our own minds.
Have you ever reacted emotionally and had absolutely no idea why? We've all been there, right? It's just this universally confusing human experience. We love to think of ourselves as these highly rational, in control beings with our hands firmly on the steering wheel of our lives. But then, bam, out of nowhere, this intense wave of sadness or anger or maybe anxiety just washes over us, and it seems completely untethered to what's actually going on. Well, the source material we're exploring today reveals something incredible. This lack of self-awareness, it's not a personal feeling. It doesn't mean you're weak. It's actually a profound psychological mystery. It's basically a glitch in the human operating system that every single one of us shares. And to put into perspective just how deep this glitch really goes, there is this totally shocking anecdote from our text. The author talks about taking a battery of psychological tests during some early counseling, determined to be super honest, lay it all out there, and get better. Well, their results come back, and the counselor tells the author they scored an 85%. At first, the author is thinking, hey, great, 85%, that's a solid B. But the counselor shuts that down real quick. She says, no, you are lying to yourself 85% of the time. I mean, just pause and think about that number for a second. 85% of the time, our very own minds are spinning fictions. They're creating these massive cognitive distortions that completely separate us from reality. Section 1, the myth of self-knowledge. So why exactly are we so incredibly blind to our own inner workings? Well, for centuries, we've kind of leaned on that famous 17th century idea from the philosopher René Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Because of that catchy little phrase, we just assume that since we experience our thoughts, we must fully understand where they come from. We assume the mind is like a perfectly clear glass window. But our source material points out that this is a massive, massive misconception. The reality is that your mind is a heavy filter. Just because you're experiencing a thought or a feeling in your conscious mind doesn't mean you have any clue where it originated or that it even represents reality. Section 2, the mental content error. And here is the main culprit, the knowledge of mental content. This is actually categorized as a specific philosophical thinking error. It completely exposes the false human assumption that we clearly understand the inner workings of our own minds. We walk around thinking we have absolute 20/20 visibility into why we do what we do. But in reality, our mind's mechanisms are deeply, deeply mysterious. Our thoughts and emotions often operate completely beneath the surface. They quietly influence our perceptions, our judgments, and our ideas without us ever consciously knowing it. Assuming we always know exactly why we think or feel something is a huge trap. It leads directly to oversimplified judgments and massive self-deception. And this brilliantly illustrates how this philosophical error shows up constantly in our daily lives. Just think about these everyday symptoms. Have you ever been chatting with someone and just blurted out something entirely unintended? Or maybe you've had a completely mysterious, over-the-top emotional reaction to a totally harmless comment? What about procrastination? Avoiding actions, like starting a big project or having a tough conversation without actually knowing why you're avoiding them? Look, these aren't just random, quirky little things we do. They are direct evidence of the knowledge of mental content error in action. Your unconscious is literally driving the bus, and your conscious mind is just sitting in the passenger seat, completely bewildered. Section 3, the roots of self-deception. So you're probably wondering, why on earth would our brains be wired to hide the truth from us? Well, the source material uses an absolutely powerful metaphor to answer this. It describes the unconscious part of ourselves, the part that constantly throws us off track, as a distracting trickster. I want you to think of it like an unruly, cranky little child whose only goal in life is immediate gratification and comfort. Now, this trickster isn't evil. It actually evolved to help you. It works overtime to desperately protect your ego and your self-esteem from uncomfortable truths or negative emotions. It'll use literally any strategy, distraction, procrastination, avoidance, just to keep you safe from anything that might threaten your identity. To see this trickster in action, just look at how the ego creates these noble but totally false narratives to mask what we're actually afraid of. Consciously, you might tell yourself, hey, I'm just protecting my peace. I don't need to date anyone right now. I mean, that sounds incredibly healthy and great, right? But the unconscious truth, hiding just beneath the surface, might actually be, I am absolutely terrified of intimacy and rejection. The ego wraps up our fears in this cozy little protective blanket of self-righteousness or logic.
It drives our self-deception so well that we genuinely, 100%, believe our own excuses.
The author brings in a great quote from Mark Manson here, who says, "Our emotions are important, but they're also kind of dumb. They overreact to things by design." And honestly, this is such a critical point. Evolutionary biology designed our emotions to keep us alive out on the savannah thousands of years ago. When we get scared, our body immediately wants to run or hide. When we get angry, we literally want to break things. These emotions are incredibly powerful, for sure, but they're also completely disconnected from our modern logical reality. It's an evolutionary mismatch, and it adds a massive layer of confusion to our mental content.
Section 4. Tools for Inner Awareness.
Okay, so now that we know this trickster is hanging out in our heads, how do we actually peer beneath the surface? First up is the ruler method. This is a highly structured, totally achievable way to just hit pause, figure out what's actually happening in your body, and bring those unconscious emotions out into the light. It stands for recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. So you start by simply recognizing the physical cues, like, is your heart racing? Then you seek to understand the context. Okay, what triggered this feeling? Next, you label it. Give it a specific name, like shame or jealousy, instead of just saying, I feel bad. Then you find a healthy way to express it, and finally, you regulate it. It is an amazing step-by-step roadmap for dismantling all that emotional confusion.
To practically process all this, the text offers a brilliant little rhyme. When you feel bad, put your thoughts on the pad. So the crucial point is that journaling isn't just some quaint hobby. It is a vital investigative tool. The text advises that physically mapping out your thoughts on paper forces your brain to slow down. It literally exposes the hidden connections, the emotional triggers, and the cognitive distortions that normally move way too fast for you to catch in your head. When it's right there on the pad, the trickster simply can't hide it from you anymore.
Let's move to and see how this builds directly into our next tool, knowing your ABCs. This concept is actually borrowed from cognitive behavioral therapy. A is the activating event, basically what just happened. C is the consequence, how you reacted or how you felt about it. Now in life, we usually jump straight from A to C. Someone doesn't text us back, that's A, and we feel completely rejected, that's C. But B is the belief, and guys, this is where the trickster lives. The belief is the automatic interpretation your mind just made in a split second. They didn't text back because they hate me. By tracking the event, identifying that totally distorted belief, and seeing the consequence, you actively interrupt the cycle of self-sabotage.
As we start to bring this all together, consider this incredibly powerful quote from psychologist Carl Jung. When one tries desperately to be good and wonderful and perfect, then all the more the shadow develops a definite will to be black and evil and destructive. Wow, this strikes at the absolute heart of the knowledge of mental content error. If you deny the messy, the uncomfortable, or the deeply unconscious parts of your mind, they don't go away. They only grow stronger and way more disruptive. Accepting our whole, completely flawed reality, what Jung calls our shadow self, is literally the only way to achieve true self-knowledge and lasting peace.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. The mind is vast, it's complex, and it's very often a stranger to itself. But you know what? You now have the actual tools to start mapping that territory. So I want to leave you with this one final thought. What might you find if you finally look beneath the surface of your own mind today? It definitely takes courage to face the trickster and challenge your deeply held beliefs, but the clarity waiting on the other side, it's entirely worth the journey. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope this sparks a fascinating inner investigation of your own.